an original story narrated exclusively for love written in silence. Sebastian Vale, Duke of Calderwick, wiped dirt from his hands onto Gardener's trousers as ladies in silk gowns swept past him without a glance. Miss Marianne Elwood paused at the edge of the crowded terrace, her simple dress marking her as clearly as his soil-stained hands marked him, while other women fluttered fans against the summer heat. She approached with a glass of water, extending it toward him with a small, genuine smile that transformed her unremarkable features. Sebastian hesitated before accepting the offering, their fingers briefly touching on the cool glass as the golden evening light caught in the water. Neither spoke as their eyes met. Two invisible people suddenly seeing each other amid a sea of aristocrats who noticed neither the disguised duke nor the quiet companion. "Your Grace, are you certain about this?" Unconventional approach. Sebastian Vale, the Duke of Calderwick, adjusted the rough linen shirt that scratched against his skin as his valet, Morris, frowned with disapproval. "Perfectly certain," Sebastian replied, examining his reflection. The gardener's clothes transformed him completely. Weathered boots, worn trousers, and calloused hands artificially created with a mixture of dirt and walnut stain. 3 seasons of fortune hunters have exhausted my patience, but surely there are more dignified methods of finding a wife than this. Sebastian turned from the mirror. When a man possesses a title and £30,000 a year, Morris, he quickly discovers that everyone sees the wealth, not the man. Lady Harrington's summer ball presents the perfect opportunity to deceive innocent young ladies, to discover an honest one. Sebastian's voice hardened. "I've watched mothers coach daughters on how to laugh at my jokes before I've made them. I've endured practice speeches about shared interests from women who've memorized my preferences, from gossip columns." Through the window of his carriage, Sebastian observed Ashmere Hall come into view, windows blazing with light, carriages disgorging silks and jewels onto the drive. His own conveyance would deliver him not to the main entrance, but to the servants' quarters, where arrangements had been made with Lady Harrington's head gardener. "I'll attend to the roses near the terrace for several hours," Sebastian continued. "If anyone, acknowledges me as a human being rather than a servant beneath notice, I'll consider it a promising start." Morris sighed. "And if no one does?" Sebastian's smile held no warmth. "Then I'll have confirmed what 3 seasons have taught me, that I am merely a title to be acquired, not a man to be known." Miss Marianne Elwood stood 2 careful steps behind Lady Penelope Whitmore, holding a spare fan and a small vial of smelling salts. At 26, Marianne had perfected the art of existing without being seen. "The Duke of Calderwick is expected tonight," Lady Whitmore whispered to her daughter, Charlotte. "Remember everything we discussed. Mention your interest in his conservatory. He's known for rare orchids. And for heaven's sake, stand straight." Charlotte nodded, anxiety creasing her otherwise perfect features. Marianne's gaze drifted across the ballroom, mentally cataloging the invisible workers, who, like her, enabled these glittering events. Footmen balancing trays, maids discreetly collecting discarded glasses, a gardener tending roses on the terrace. Society functioned on the labor of the unseen. 5 years as a companion had taught Marianne to anticipate needs without being asked, to speak only when spoken to, and to expect nothing beyond her modest salary. The daughter of a country vicar, she had entered service after her father's death left her without means. Her education and gentle manners made her suitable for companionship rather than housework, a position marginally better than many, but still firmly below the salt. "Miss Elwood," Lady Whitmore said without turning, "fetch Charlotte some lemonade. The poor girl looks flushed." "Yes, my lady." Marianne navigated the crowded ballroom with practiced ease. People moved aside for ladies of quality, but rarely for companions. She had learned to slip through spaces, to time her movements to avoid collision, to apologize for existing in others' paths. At the refreshment table, she reached for lemonade, just as another woman did the same. The woman, draped in sapphires, withdrew her hand as if touched by something unclean. "I beg your pardon," Marianne murmured. Though the fault was not hers, the woman merely sniffed and turned away. This was Marianne's world, a place where she was simultaneously essential and invisible, required to be present, yet expected to disappear. She collected the lemonade and returned to her post, a ghost in gray silk, watching life unfold from its margins. The evening air hung heavy with perfume and summer heat as the ball spilled onto the terrace. Ladies fanned themselves, while gentlemen dabbed at foreheads with handkerchiefs. Through the open doors, violins played a waltz that seemed to ripple in the humid air. Marianne stood near a marble column, momentarily relieved of her duties, as Charlotte danced with a viscount. From her vantage point, she observed the young gardener working diligently among the roses that bordered the terrace. He moved with purpose, his hands skilled but his posture suggesting he was unaccustomed to such labor. Something about him caught her attention. Perhaps the careful way he handled the blooms, or how he occasionally glanced at the revelers with an expression more contemplative than deferential. What struck her most was how thoroughly the glittering crowd ignored him. Ladies in expensive gowns brushed past without acknowledgement, their skirts sometimes disturbing his work. Gentlemen gestured in conversation, nearly striking him with their animated movements, yet never seeing him. He was, like her, part of the background against which society's performance played out. The heat intensified as the evening progressed. Marianne noticed the gardener wiping his brow with his sleeve, his face flushed from exertion. She glanced at the refreshment table, where servants had placed pitchers of water for the guests, not the workers. Without conscious decision, she filled a glass and made her way toward him. It was a small act, yet she felt strangely conspicuous, as though crossing an invisible boundary. "You look as though you could use this," she said quietly, extending the glass. He looked up, surprise evident in his eyes, not merely at being offered water, but at being seen at all. His gaze met hers directly, without the quick downward flick that servants typically employed. "Thank you," he said, his voice cultured despite his rough appearance. He accepted the glass, his fingers brushing hers momentarily. "The roses are beautiful," she offered, a slight smile. "Beauty often goes unappreciated." She nodded, understanding the double meaning. Not by everyone. For a moment they stood in silence, two invisible people acknowledging each other's existence while the ball continued around them. The dancers and drinkers oblivious to the small moment of humanity unfolding at the garden's edge. "You're not a regular gardener here," Marianne observed the following afternoon. Having discovered him again among the roses, she had slipped away during Lady Whitmore's nap, drawn to the gardens by something she couldn't quite name. He straightened, setting aside pruning shears. "What makes you say that?" "Your hands." She nodded toward them. "The calluses are new, and you handle the tools correctly, but not effortlessly." A flicker of something, alarm, amusement, crossed his face. "Perceptive of you, Mississippi." "Elwood." "Marianne Elwood." She hesitated. "I'm Lady Whitmore's companion." "Sebastian," he offered, omitting any surname. "And you're right. I'm assisting temporarily." They stood in awkward silence until Marianne gestured toward a stone bench, partially hidden by flowering shrubs. "I have a quarter hour before I'm missed. Would you mind terribly if I sat? It's rare to find quiet during these house parties." He nodded, returning to his pruning as she settled on the bench. The distant sounds of the house, servants calling to one another, a piano being practiced, created a peaceful backdrop. "Do you enjoy being a companion, Miss Elwood?" he asked after a moment. The question surprised her. Few people inquired about her feelings regarding her position. "It's respectable work," she answered carefully. "Lady Whitmore is not unkind." "That's not what I asked." Marianne looked at him sharply, then softened. "No, it's not what you asked. I enjoy having a roof over my head and food on my plate. The rest is immaterial. Surely, there must be more to life than mere survival. For some, perhaps." She smoothed her gray dress. "What about you? Do you enjoy gardening?" "I find peace in it," he said, his expression thoughtful. "There's honesty in plants. They respond to care, not status or wealth. Unlike people." "Unlike most people," he corrected, meeting her eyes. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. "I should return," she said, rising reluctantly. "Will you come tomorrow?" The question seemed to surprise him as much as her. Marianne hesitated. Propriety dictated she should not seek out a gardener's company, yet in his presence she felt seen in a way she rarely experienced. "If I can," she said finally. "Same time." He nodded, a genuine smile transforming his features. "I'll look forward to it, Miss Elwood." "As will I," she replied, realizing with quiet surprise that she meant it. Their meetings continued through the week, settling into a pattern as natural as the garden's rhythm. Each afternoon, While the household rested, Marianne would find Sebastian among the roses, or near the small greenhouse at the garden's edge. He always seemed to anticipate her arrival, though neither acknowledged this expectation. "I brought something, Mary," and said on the fourth day, withdrawing a small volume from her pocket. "You mentioned enjoying Wordsworth." Sebastian wiped his hands on his trousers before accepting the book. "Lines written a few miles above Tintern Abbey," he read, his voice softening. "A favorite of mine. Mine as well." She sat on their usual bench. "Nature as restoration for the soul, the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart," he quoted, his eyes not on the page, but on the distant hills visible beyond the garden walls. Marianne studied him, puzzled by the contradictions he presented. His speech and knowledge belonged to a gentleman, yet here he was, tending roses in worn clothes. She had considered asking directly, but feared breaking whatever fragile connection they had formed. Instead, she asked about the plants. Sebastian spoke of each with knowledge and passion, explaining how certain roses required specific soils, how others needed particular pruning to thrive. He showed her seedlings in the greenhouse, describing their potential with such vision that Marianne could almost see the mature plants he imagined. "You speak of them as a mother might speak of children," she observed. "Growing things require patience and attention," he replied. "Much like people. People can be more complicated." "True." He handed her a cutting of lavender. "But often what they need is equally simple, to be seen, to be valued for what they truly are, rather than what use they might serve." Marianne twirled the lavender stem, inhaling its fragrance. "Is that why you're here, Sebastian? To be seen for who you truly are?" His hands stilled on the plant he was tending. For a moment, she thought she'd overstepped. Then he looked at her with an expression so unguarded, it made her breath catch. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "I needed to learn how to truly see others first." Sebastian stood before his shaving mirror in the small room he'd been assigned in the servants' quarters, examining his reflection. A week of outdoor work had darkened his skin and lightened his hair. His hands, despite gloves, showed the beginnings of real calluses where artificial ones had been applied. The physical transformation was the least of it. Each afternoon with Miss Elwood, Marianne left him increasingly uncomfortable with his deception. She spoke to him with a candor he'd never experienced, sharing observations about the household, her limited childhood, in a vicarage, her love of poetry. In return, he offered carefully edited truths, omitting his title and position, while sharing genuine thoughts he'd never voiced to anyone. "This has gone far enough," he muttered to his reflection. The experiment had succeeded beyond expectation. He had found someone who saw the man, not the Duke. Yet the longer he maintained the charade, the more it felt like betrayal, rather than protection. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, hastily donning his shirt. Morris slipped in, closing the door carefully. "Your Grace, a letter from your steward requiring immediate attention." He handed Sebastian a sealed document. "And may I inquire how much longer this adventure will continue? Your absence from London is causing speculation." Sebastian broke the seal, scanning the contents. "Let them speculate." "And the young lady?" Morris asked carefully. Sebastian's head snapped up. "What young lady?" "The one in gray who visits the garden each afternoon." At Sebastian's surprised expression, Morris sighed. "I am your valet, Your Grace. Noticing things is my profession." Sebastian turned back to the letter, though the words blurred before him. "She's a companion, kind, intelligent, observant, and unaware she's conversing with a duke." Yes, the admission tasted bitter. "What do you intend to do?" Sebastian folded the letter deliberately. "I don't know. If I may be so bold," Morris said quietly, "secrets of this nature rarely end well for anyone involved." After Morris departed, Sebastian remained motionless, caught between worlds. The Duke of Calderwick could have anything he desired, except perhaps the honest connection he'd found while pretending to be someone else. "Miss Elwood spends considerable time in the gardens lately," observed Lady Harrington, her voice carrying just enough to reach Marianne, as she arranged flowers in the drawing room. "Fresh air agrees with companions, I suppose," replied Lady Whitmore with a dismissive wave, "though one does wonder about propriety." Marianne's hands stilled momentarily before continuing their work. She had believed her afternoon escapes went unnoticed. "The head gardener mentioned his new assistant has been particularly attentive to the roses Near the east terrace, Lady Harrington continued. Curious timing. Surely you don't suggest. One must consider the household's reputation. Servants talk. Marianne focused on the arrangement before her, face burning. She was no naive girl. At 26, she understood exactly what they implied. That she, a gentlewoman reduced to dependency, might form an inappropriate attachment to a gardener. The irony was that they weren't entirely wrong. She had grown to anticipate their conversations with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. Sebastian treated her as an equal, something even other companions rarely did. With him, she could speak freely, laugh genuinely, exist fully. Perhaps a word with your companion would be prudent, Lady Harrington suggested, before the situation becomes awkward. Later that evening, as Marianne helped Charlotte prepare for dinner, Lady Whitmore cleared her throat delicately. Miss Elwood, while I appreciate your dedication to Charlotte's needs, I must remind you that your position reflects upon this family. Marianne kept her eyes lowered. Yes, my lady. Your frequent solitary walks have been noticed. A companion should remain companionable. The implication was clear. Stay visible, stay appropriate. Remember your place. I understand, my lady. Good. That will be all. Alone in her small room that night, Mary, and pressed her hand against the window glass, looking out at the moonlit garden, where hours earlier, Sebastian had shown her a night-blooming cereus, about to flower. It opens for just one night, he had explained, his voice soft with wonder. All that preparation for a single moment of perfect beauty. She had not known that their time might be equally finite, a brief flowering of connection in lives otherwise defined by the rigid boundaries of their stations. Tomorrow, she decided, she would tell him they could no longer meet. The following day, Lady Harrington arranged a garden luncheon to take advantage of the splendid roses. Guests spread across the terrace, while servants arranged tables and chairs precisely where Marianne and Sebastian usually met. Marianne, attending Charlotte, glimpsed Sebastian working nearby. She had risen early, intending to tell him they must end their meetings, but found no opportunity. Now, trapped in her role as silent shadow, she could only watch as he methodically pruned roses within earshot of the gathering. I heard the Duke of Calderwick declined his invitation, said a portly gentleman, helping himself to cold pheasant. Unusual, considering his connection to the Harringtons. Perhaps he tired of the marriage market, suggested another. 3 seasons without selecting a bride, most peculiar for a man in his position. His recent decisions regarding the northern estate were equally baffling. The first man continued, refusing to convert tenant farmland to sheep pasture, despite the clear financial advantage. Sentiment over sense, I say. Marianne noticed Sebastian's shoulders tense, his pruning becoming more forceful. The man clearly lacks business acumen. The gentleman continued. My own advice to him regarding those properties was quite sound, yet he dismissed it outright. Sebastian straightened suddenly. We do not act without cause, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the terrace. Conversation halted. The gentleman turned, affronted. I beg your pardon? Sebastian's face registered momentary alarm before smoothing into deference. Forgive me, sir, I only meant that sometimes what appears unprofitable serves other purposes. And what would a gardener know of estate management? The man scoffed. Nothing at all. Sir Sebastian bowed slightly and returned to his work. The luncheon resumed, the interruption dismissed as a servant's impertinence. But Marianne remained frozen, the single word echoing in her mind. We, not here the Duke, but we, spoken with the instinctive authority of a man, defending his own decisions. She watched him now with new eyes, cataloging details she had overlooked or misinterpreted. His educated speech, his knowledge of literature, the subtle command in his posture, despite humble clothing. The mystery of Sebastian suddenly crystallized into a truth, both obvious and impossible. When he glanced up, their eyes met across the terrace. Something in her expression must have revealed her realization, for his face paled slightly before he turned away. Marianne excused herself quietly and retreated indoors, her mind racing with implications she could scarcely comprehend. Marianne did not go to the garden that afternoon, nor the next. She moved through her duties mechanically, mind churning with questions she could not voice. On the 3rd day, a note appeared on her dressing table. Please. The greenhouse. 4 o'clock. She stood by her window at the appointed hour, watching rain streak the glass. The sensible choice was clear. Ignore the note, maintain appropriate distance, preserve what security her position provided. Yet the thought of never speaking with him again, Duke or Gardner, left an emptiness she couldn't dismiss. At 4:15, she entered the greenhouse. Sebastian, or whoever he truly was, stood among the orchids, still dressed as a gardener, despite the rain that had dampened his shoulders. Neither spoke immediately. The patter of raindrops on glass filled the silence. "You haven't come to the garden," he finally said. No, her voice remained steady. It seemed unwise, because you know. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "I suspect. I don't know." He moved toward her, stopping at a respectful distance. "What do you suspect, Miss Elwood?" "That you are not who you've presented yourself to be." She met his gaze directly. "That you are, in fact, the Duke of Calderwick." He didn't deny it. "And yet you came anyway. I wanted to understand why. Would you believe it began as self-protection?" He gestured vaguely. 3 seasons of being pursued for my title, rather than myself. I thought to discover someone who might see the man, not the Duke, by deceiving everyone around you. Yes, he accepted the accusation without defense. A flawed approach, as I've come to realize. Marianne wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the greenhouse warmth. "Did you find it amusing? The companion and the gardener, both invisible to proper society?" "No," his voice softened. "I found it illuminating. I should go." She turned toward the door. "Marianne," she paused, the informal address stopping her more effectively than a hand on her arm. "I never lied about who I am," he said quietly. "Only what I am." She left without responding, uncertain whether the distinction mattered at all. The whispers began at breakfast. Seen together frequently, quite familiar terms, her reputation naturally. Charlotte leaned close to Marianne, voice barely audible. "They're talking about you and the gardener." Marianne focused on buttering toast. She had no appetite to eat. "There's nothing to discuss." "I believe you," Charlotte said earnestly. "But Mother is concerned." By midday, servants' glances lingered when Marianne passed. A maid delivering firewood paused unnecessarily in her room. The housekeeper inquired with pointed politeness whether Miss Elwood required anything to make her remaining time comfortable. Lady Whitmore summoned her after luncheon, face composed in practiced concern. "Miss Elwood, you've been a satisfactory companion to Charlotte." She adjusted her bracelets. "However, certain observations have been brought to my attention." Marianne stood perfectly still, hands clasped at her waist. "My lady, your conduct with a member of the garden staff has raised questions about your judgment." Lady Whitmore sighed delicately. "You understand that Charlotte is impressionable. Her prospects depend upon impeccable associations. I assure you, my behavior has been entirely proper. Intent matters less than appearance in these situations." Lady Whitmore's voice remained gentle, making the dismissal all the more devastating. "I've arranged for you to depart tomorrow. A month's wages as consideration, of course, and my reference." A slight hesitation. "Given the circumstances, perhaps a period of reflection before seeking another position would be advisable." Without a reference, Marianne knew. Her prospects narrowed dramatically. Lady Whitmore was effectively closing doors throughout respectable society. "I understand," she said, voice steady despite the panic rising within her. "Thank you for your consideration." That evening, packing her modest possessions, Marianne contemplated the swift destruction of her security. One connection, innocent in fact if not appearance, had cost her everything. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Charlotte entered, eyes red-rimmed. "It's dreadfully unfair," she whispered, embracing Marianne impulsively. "I told Mother nothing happened. Thank you for believing me. Where will you go?" Marianne folded a shawl carefully. "My former vicar keeps a list of positions. Something will arise." Both knew this was optimistic at best. Without a reference, even a vicar's recommendation carried limited weight. "I'll miss you," Charlotte said simply. "And I you." Marianne departed Ashmere Hall as she had arrived quietly, with minimal disruption to the household's rhythm. No tearful goodbyes or dramatic confrontations marked her exit. Lady Whitmore provided the promised wages, a closed carriage to the village, and final instructions delivered with practiced compassion that nonetheless made clear no further communication would be welcome. The village inn, her temporary lodging until a mail coach could take her to her cousin's home in Hertfordshire, offered modest comfort. Her room overlooked the village green, where local children played under summer-heavy trees. Marianne watched them absently, calculating how long her remaining funds might sustain her. 2 months, perhaps 3 with careful economy. After that, a knock at her door interrupted these grim calculations. "A letter for you, miss," said the innkeeper's wife, extending a sealed note. The paper was expensive, the handwriting unfamiliar. Marianne broke the plain seal, her hands trembling slightly. "Miss Elwood, I have learned of your departure from Ashmere Hall and the circumstances surrounding it. The responsibility for this situation rests entirely with me. Please allow me to call upon you at the inn tomorrow at 2 o'clock to discuss matters that cannot adequately be addressed in writing. With deepest regret, Sebastian Vale, Duke of Calderwick." Marianne set the letter down carefully, his first communication under his true name, and it contained an apology without actually apologizing. How very aristocratic. The following afternoon found her seated in the inn's private parlor, dressed in her second-best gown, back straight, and expression composed. Whatever he intended to offer, money perhaps, or assistance securing another position, she would decline. Her dignity, at least, remained her own. He arrived precisely at 2, dressed now as befitted his station. The transformation was remarkable, yet somehow unsurprising. The gardener's quiet authority, now manifest in fine clothing, and the subtle deference of the innkeeper who showed him in. "Miss Elwood," he bowed formally. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Your Grace," she curtsied, the title feeling strange when addressed to the man she had known simply as Sebastian. "I confess I was curious about what couldn't be written. An explanation, an apology." He remained standing, though she had resumed her seat. "And a request. I require none of those things, Your Grace. Nevertheless, I ask that you hear me." His voice softened, not as a duke, but as a man who has caused you harm through thoughtless actions. Marianne gestured to the chair opposite hers. "Then speak, sir, I am listening." "I would like to speak with you in the greenhouse at Ashmere," he said, surprising her. "Not here, where every word will fuel village gossip." "I no longer have access to Ashmere Hall," Marianne reminded him. "I do." His expression remained serious. "My carriage is outside. We could return briefly, speak privately, and I would ensure you're brought back before evening." Every instinct warned against this impropriety, yet the need for closure, for truth, outweighed caution. Very well. They rode in silence, the luxurious carriage a stark reminder of the gulf between their stations. Upon reaching Ashmere, Sebastian led her through the garden's side entrances, directly to the greenhouse, where golden evening light filtered through glass panes and turned ordinary plants into something ethereal. "I owe you the complete truth," he began, standing among the orchids where they had last spoken. "The deception began as a test, a way to find someone who might value Sebastian, rather than Calderwick the Duke. And I passed your test," Marianne said quietly. "How fortunate for me." He flinched at her tone. "It wasn't. I never intended." He stopped, collecting himself. "What began as a test became something entirely different. Our conversations were the most honest I've had in years." "Honest." The word stung. "You lied about your very identity." "Yes." He met her gaze directly, and in doing so, discovered that titles and wealth mean nothing compared to simple human kindness. "You offered water to a gardener, while duchesses walked past without seeing him. You shared books and thoughts with a man you believed had nothing to offer you. And now I have lost my position, my reference, and my security, Mary," and said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "All because you wished to conduct a social experiment." Sebastian moved closer, stopping when she tensed. "I never meant for this to happen. When I learned of your dismissal, I tried to intervene without revealing my role. But Lady Whitmore was resolute. Of course she was. A companion with questionable judgment is easily replaced. A duke, however. She let the implication hang between them. "I cannot undo what's happened," he said softly, "but I can offer reparation. A position in my household, perhaps. Or no." Marianne's voice was firm. "I will not become an obligation to be managed or a mistake to be corrected. Then what can I do?" She reached for the glass of water that sat forgotten on a potting bench, the same glass she had brought him that first evening, and held it out. "You can take this," she said simply, and understand what it meant. Sebastian stared at the glass in her hand, recognition dawning in his eyes. "The first time I offered this," Marianne continued, "it was freely given, one person seeing another's need. I didn't know you were a duke. I didn't want anything from you. And now, he asked quietly, now I return it to remind us both that dignity cannot be measured by tests or purchased with reparations. She set the glass on the table between them. I am not a charity case, Your Grace, nor an experiment in human nature. Sebastian remained silent, his expression unreadable in the fading light. When I offered you water, she continued, I did so because in that moment we were equals in our invisibility. You deliberately unseen, me unseen by circumstance. But we were never truly equal, were we? In the ways that matter most, we were, he said finally. Intelligence, principle, the capacity for kindness, in these, I found you my superior. Mary shook her head. Pretty words, but reality remains. You return to your duchy, your privilege, your life. I leave with nothing but uncertainty. It doesn't have to be that way, doesn't it? She gestured to the greenhouse around them. This, our conversations, our connection, existed in a space between worlds. Outside these glass walls, society has rules that neither of us can simply ignore. Sebastian took a step forward. What if I don't want to return to that life? What if our conversations showed me how hollow it is? Then that is your choice to make, Marianne said gently. But it must be made freely, not from guilt or obligation. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the latch. I valued our friendship, Sebastian, perhaps in another life, with different circumstances. Marianne, his voice stopped her. May I write to you, not as the Duke of Calderwick, but as the man you knew in this garden? She hesitated, knowing the sensible answer was no. Prolonging connection would only extend pain. Yet the thought of severing this bond completely felt equally impossible. My cousin's address is Elm Cottage, Little Hempston, Hertfordshire, she said finally, but I make no promises to reply. As she stepped outside, the evening air felt cooler against her skin, summer beginning its gradual surrender to autumn, one season yielding to the next. 3 weeks after leaving Ashmere Hall, Marianne received a letter from a London solicitor, Mr. Phillips. The envelope contained a second sealed letter and a brief note explaining that the enclosed had been entrusted to his firm with instructions to forward it to her. She broke the inner seal with curiosity. Dear Miss Elwood, this letter comes to you through channels that ensure your privacy. You need not fear association with my name. While respecting your wish to refuse direct assistance, I cannot in good conscience allow the injustice you suffered to stand without remedy. I have therefore established a trust for the benefit of gentlewomen who find themselves in circumstances similar to yours, dismissed without reference or recourse. The Elwood Foundation will provide temporary accommodation, modest stipends, and assistance securing new positions for qualified applicants. The trust is independently managed. I have no role in its operation beyond initial funding. You are, of course, eligible for its services should you wish to avail yourself of them. Mr. Phillips can provide details without any obligation on your part. This action is not taken to ease my conscience or purchase your forgiveness. It is simply the right thing to do. A lesson I learned from a woman who once offered water to a thirsty gardener without thought of reward. Respectfully yours, S.V. Marianne read the letter twice, emotions conflicting. The foundation represented exactly the kind of assistance she had refused. Yet its broader purpose transcended her individual situation. By helping others similarly situated, Sebastian had found a way to make amends without compromising her dignity. Mr. Phillips' accompanying note provided practical information. Offices established in London. A modest residence house acquired. Respectable women appointed as administrators. The foundation was already assisting 3 gentlewomen. Marianne set the letter aside, unsure how to respond, or whether to respond at all. Sebastian had created something meaningful from their painful situation, something that would help women whose stories mirrored her own. It was a gesture both grand and humble, public in impact yet private in motivation. Later that evening, she wrote to Mr. Phillips requesting additional information about the foundation's services. Not for herself, her cousin's hospitality remained secure, but to understand better the work being done in her name. The letter to Sebastian remained unwritten. Autumn painted Hertfordshire in russets and golds as Marianne settled into life at Elm Cottage. Her cousin Jane, a widow with a comfortable income, welcomed her presence without pressing for explanations. The village, while small, offered modest diversions, a circulating library, a church with an excellent choir, occasional assemblies at the local inn. Sebastian wrote faithfully each week. His letters never presumed upon their former connection, nor mentioned his title. Instead, he shared observations about his gardens, books he'd read, thoughts on everything from village politics to philosophy. He never asked for replies, yet each letter ended with a question or reflection that invited response. For 2 months, Marianne read his letters, but did not answer. What could she say? Their worlds remained separate despite his efforts to bridge them. In late October, Jane received an invitation to a small dinner party at neighboring Thornfield Manor. The new tenant is a gentleman from London, she told Marianne. Apparently quite respectable. You'll accompany me, of course. Marianne agreed without enthusiasm. Such gatherings invariably meant sitting with other companions and poor relations, while the principal guests enjoyed conversation. The evening of the dinner arrived cold and clear. As their carriage approached Thornfield, Marianne noticed extensive work being done in the long-neglected gardens, new plantings, repaired walls, a greenhouse under construction. The tenant must be planning to stay, she remarked. Inside, they were shown to a modestly appointed drawing room, where several local families had already gathered. Marianne scanned the room automatically, then froze. Sebastian stood by the fireplace, dressed simply but well, engaged in conversation with the vicar. When he turned and saw her, his expression transformed with quiet joy. Jane leaned close. That's Mr. Vale, the new tenant. Do you know him? Before Marianne could respond, Sebastian approached and bowed. Miss Elwood, Mrs. Winters. Thank you for coming. You're the tenant. Marianne managed, finding her voice. I am. His eyes held hers. I've taken Thornfield for a year. The gardens need considerable attention. Throughout dinner, Sebastian performed the duties of host with easy grace, never singling Marianne out, yet somehow making her central to every conversation. He spoke of books she had mentioned loving, asked about local customs she had described in passing, references only she would recognize from their garden conversations. As the evening concluded, he handed her into her carriage, pressing a folded note into her palm. I am not here as a duke, just a man waiting for a second chance. The greenhouse at Thornfield Manor neared completion as November's chill settled over the countryside. Marianne observed its progress during her walks, noting the care taken with its construction, the southern exposure, the quality of glass, the heating system being installed. A week after the dinner party, she received a simple invitation. The first orchid blooms tomorrow. 4 o'clock, if you would care to see it. She stood outside the greenhouse at the appointed hour, watching through the glass as Sebastian adjusted the temperature controls. No longer a pretend gardener nor a formal duke, but something in between, a man engaged in work he clearly loved. He looked up, saw her, and smiled. The door opened. You came. Simple words, weighted with meaning. I was curious about your orchids, she replied, stepping inside. Warmth enveloped her immediately, the air heavy with moisture, and the scent of growing things, only one blooming so far. He led her to a small plant with a single perfect white flower, Phalaenopsis amabilis, the moth orchid. It's beautiful. It's honest, he said quietly. It can only thrive when given exactly what it needs, no more, no less. They stood in silence, the orchid between them. Why Thornfield, she finally asked. Why here? I needed to step away from London, from expectations. His eyes met hers, and I hoped, perhaps, that I might forgive you, that you might see me, he corrected. Not the duke, not the gardener, just the man. Marianne touched the orchid's leaf gently. I've read your letters, all of them, but you didn't write back. I wasn't certain what to say. She turned to face him fully. What happens now, Sebastian? You've created a foundation in my name. You've moved to my village. These are not small gestures. No, he agreed, but they're honest ones. He moved to a small table where a pitcher and 2 glasses stood ready. Filling one, he extended it toward her, a deliberate echo of her gesture months before. I can't promise to be perfect, he said, but I can promise to always see you, Marianne, not as a companion or an obligation, but as the remarkable woman who offered kindness when no one else did. She accepted the glass, their fingers brushing, and I can't promise to forget the past, but perhaps we can build something new from it. I would like that, he said simply. Outside, the late afternoon sun broke through November clouds, casting golden light through the glass walls, illuminating 2 people no longer invisible to each other or the world.